Most people think they understand protein. Eggs, chicken breast, protein powder, maybe beans if they're trying to be healthy on a budget. That's the list. And for decades, that list hasn't really changed. But here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. There's a plant technically the smallest flowering plant on Earth that quietly beats eggs in protein density, grows without soil, multiplies insanely fast, and can be harvested in days, not months, and almost nobody talks about it. Not your grocery store, not your doctor, not the mainstream health channels. And once you understand what it is and how it works, the real question becomes uncomfortable. Why wouldn't this be everywhere? I'm not new to this space. I've tested hype foods, forgotten crops, survival nutrition, so-called superfoods, and budget protein sources for years. I've watched trends explode and disappear. I've seen things labeled miracle foods that were nothing more than good marketing wrapped around mediocre nutrition. And I've also seen truly powerful options get ignored because they don't fit the system. Duckweed, specifically Wolffia, falls squarely into that second category. This isn't a magic plant. It won't cure anything. It's not a detox. And it's not some ancient secret guarded by monks in the mountains. It's something far more threatening than that. It's practical, it's cheap, it's scalable, and it doesn't make anyone rich. Duckweed has been floating on ponds, lakes, and still water for thousands of years. If you've ever seen a green carpet covering stagnant water and thought, that's just pond scum, congratulations, you're not alone. That assumption is exactly why this plant stayed invisible. Wolffia, the smallest member of the duckweed family, is so tiny that individual plants look like grains of green sand. No roots, no stems, no soil. Just pure, efficient biological machinery converting sunlight, water, and nutrients into dense nutrition. Here's where things get interesting. On a dry weight basis, Wolffia contains up to 40 to 45% protein, depending on growing conditions. Eggs sit lower, soy sits lower. Most grains don't even come close. And unlike many plant proteins, duckweed contains a complete amino acid profile, meaning it checks all the essential boxes humans actually care about. That alone should have made it headline news years ago. But headlines require marketing budgets, distribution chains, and industries willing to promote something. Duckweed had none of that. Instead, duckweed ended up categorized as animal feed. Fish farms use it, ducks eat it. Some livestock operations quietly rely on it because it grows faster than almost anything else on Earth. Under ideal conditions, duckweed can double its biomass in 24 to 48 hours. Let that sink in. While fields need seasons, weather, fertilizers, and logistics, this plant just multiplies. I remember the first time I looked seriously into duckweed. Not from a headline, not from a viral post, but buried in agricultural and food security research. That's usually where the real stuff lives documents no one optimizes for clicks. The more I read, the more obvious the pattern became. This wasn't ignored because it didn't work. It was ignored because it didn't fit. Duckweed doesn't need farmland. It doesn't need tractors. It doesn't need patented seeds. It doesn't need long supply chains. You can grow it in shallow water, containers, ponds, even controlled indoor systems. That makes it incredible for food resilience and terrible for traditional agriculture economics. There's no billion-dollar lobby pushing floating green specks. And before anyone jumps to conclusions, let's be clear. This isn't a conspiracy in the Hollywood sense. No secret meetings, no villains twirling mustaches, just incentives. Systems promote what makes money, not what makes sense. At different points in history, duckweed actually did get attention. During food shortages and wartime research, scientists looked at it as an emergency protein source. NASA even studied duckweed as part of closed-loop life support systems, because when you're thinking about feeding humans in space, efficiency matters more than marketing. You don't care how weird it looks, you care about output. And that's the recurring theme with duckweed. It's ugly. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't have a romantic origin story. You can sell it in glossy packaging with buzzwords like ancient grain or superfruit from the Andes. It's just effective. In Southeast Asia, Wolffia has been eaten traditionally for generations. In Thailand and Laos, it's known locally and cooked into dishes like omelets and soups. Not as a novelty, as food. But because it didn't come with export branding or Western validation, it stayed regional. Meanwhile, the global market poured billions into protein powders and monocrop soy. One thing I've learned after years in this niche is that hype almost always runs ahead of value. Duckweed is the opposite. The value ran ahead, and the hype never showed up. Now, let me address the skepticism head on, because if you're thinking critically, you should be asking questions. If it's so good, why isn't everyone eating it? Is it safe? Is it practical? Is this another internet exaggeration? Those are fair questions. And in the next parts, I'm going to answer them honestly: what duckweed does well, where it falls short, and who it actually makes sense for. Because no food is perfect. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. But here's what matters right now. Duckweed challenges the assumption that protein has to be expensive, land-intensive, or industrial. It quietly proves that we've been solving the wrong problems in the wrong way. Quick pause here: if you've ever tried a superfood that didn't live up to the hype, or you found something cheap and underrated that outperformed the expensive stuff, let me know in the comments. I read those. That's where the real insights come from. Now that you understand what duckweed, specifically Wolffia, is and why it slipped through the cracks, we need to get practical. Because this is where most hidden superfood videos fall apart. They throw out one shocking stat, zoom out, and never tell you how it actually stacks up against what people already use every day. I'm not interested in that kind of surface-level take. If something is going to replace eggs, meat, or protein powder in the real world, it has to earn that spot. So let's start with the comparison everyone cares about. Eggs are considered a gold standard protein because they're complete, affordable, and familiar. On a dry weight basis, whole eggs land around the low 30% protein range. Wolffia, under controlled conditions, consistently hits 40% or more. That's not a cherry-picked number, that's repeatable across multiple studies. And unlike many plant proteins that fall short on one or two essential amino acids, duckweed's amino acid profile is surprisingly balanced. That's one of the reasons it keeps showing up in research instead of disappearing like most novelty crops. But protein percentage alone doesn't tell the whole story. Anyone who's been around nutrition long enough knows that digestion, usability, and practicality matter just as much. And this is where duckweed quietly holds its own. Because Wolffia has no tough fibers, no woody stems, and no thick cell walls, it's easier to process than many leafy greens. You're not fighting through cellulose just to access the nutrients. That matters more than most people realize. Now let's talk volume and speed, because this is where duckweed starts to feel almost unfair. Eggs take time. Chickens take space. Feed costs money. Even plant-based proteins like soy or peas need land, seasons, and harvesting cycles. Duckweed doesn't care about any of that. Given shallow water, light, and basic nutrients, it grows continuously. Not in months, in days. I've seen people underestimate this part because it sounds abstract. So let me put it plainly. You don't plant duckweed and wait. You manage it. You skim it. That's the difference. Growth isn't seasonal, it's exponential. And once you see that in action, it permanently changes how you think about food production. Now, before anyone runs off thinking duckweed is perfect, let's slow down. Because here's the part most videos skip. Duckweed is only as good as where and how it's grown. This is critical. Duckweed absorbs nutrients from water extremely efficiently, which is great when you control the environment, and a disaster when you don't. Growing it in polluted water is a hard no, period. This plant doesn't filter reality for you, it reflects it. Clean inputs matter. That's why controlled systems, ponds, or food-grade setups are non-negotiable if duckweed is being used for human consumption. This isn't a limitation, it's just reality. And it's the same standard we apply to literally every other food source, even if people forget that. Another thing people love to exaggerate is taste. Duckweed isn't delicious. It's also not disgusting. It's neutral, mild, and grassy. Think closer to spinach or algae than lettuce. In Southeast Asia, it's mixed into dishes not eaten alone. Omelets, soups, stir-fries. Used correctly, it disappears into the food. Used lazily, it tastes like pond greens. Skill matters. This is where experience beats hype. Anyone claiming it tastes amazing raw is lying or trying to sell something. Now let's compare duckweed to popular plant proteins people already rely on. Soy dominates because it's versatile and scalable, but it comes with baggage. Processing, monocropping, land use, and long ingredient lists once it becomes powder. Pea protein avoids some of that, but still requires land and heavy processing. Duckweed skips most of that entirely. Minimal processing. No soil. No large-scale farmland. That's not a small advantage, that's structural. From a budget standpoint, duckweed becomes even more interesting. Once a system is set up, production costs are extremely low. No feed, no fertilizer cycles the way crops need. Just maintenance and harvesting. That's why it keeps popping up in food security research instead of lifestyle blogs. It's not sexy, it's efficient. Quick check-in if you're watching this and thinking, why have I never seen this at a grocery store? You're asking the right question. Drop a comment if this is the first time duckweed has even crossed your radar. That reaction never gets old. Now let's talk about Wolffia specifically, because not all duckweed is equal, and this is where people mess up. The duckweed family includes multiple genera, but Wolffia stands out because it has the highest protein density and lowest fiber content. It's also the smallest, which sounds trivial until you realize that surface area to volume ratio is a big deal when you're regrowing something in water. Most negative takes on duckweed come from people lumping all species together. That's like judging all mushrooms by one bad experience. Precision matters. There's also the question of accessibility. Right now, most people encounter duckweed through powders or experimental products. That's changing slowly, but it explains why adoption has been slow. Systems lag behind science, always have. That doesn't mean the science is wrong, it means infrastructure hasn't caught up yet. If you want to explore products or research sources I'm referencing, I've linked them in the description so you can verify everything yourself. No trust required. Here's the honest takeaway so far. Duckweed isn't a replacement for everything. It's not going to erase eggs, meat, or traditional crops. But it absolutely deserves a seat at the table, and the fact that it doesn't have one yet says more about our systems than the plant itself. At this point, the question isn't whether duckweed, especially Wolffia, works. The numbers are there. The research is there. The real-world use cases exist. The real question, the uncomfortable one, is why something this efficient still sits on the sidelines while less efficient systems dominate the spotlight. And the answer isn't mysterious. It's structural. Food systems don't change because something better appears. They change when incentives force them to. Duckweed doesn't slot neatly into existing supply chains. It doesn't scale the way monocrops do. It doesn't rely on massive land ownership. And it doesn't require years of seasonal planning. That makes it powerful but also inconvenient for industries built around predictability, volume contracts, and long-term capital investment. I've watched this pattern repeat over and over. The foods that go mainstream aren't always the best. They were the ones that are easiest to standardize, brand, and distribute. Duckweed is none of those things yet. It grows locally. It favors decentralization. It thrives in small systems just as easily as large ones. That's a feature, not a bug, but only if your goal is resilience instead of dominance. Another reason duckweed stalled is perception. Humans eat with their eyes first, and duckweed looks like something you'd scoop out of a neglected pond. There's no way around that. Marketing teams can rebrand almost anything, but reprogramming instinctive disgust takes time. Kale didn't become trendy because it tasted better, it became trendy because it was reframed. Duckweed hasn't had that moment. Then there's regulation. New food sources move slowly through approval pipelines, especially when they don't have a powerful backer pushing them forward. Safety testing, standardization, and compliance cost money, a lot of money. And again, duckweed doesn't come with a built-in corporate champion willing to bankroll that process at scale. Now here's the part most people don't want to hear. Duckweed isn't for everyone. If you're looking for convenience above all else, grab and go, prepackaged, zero effort, this isn't your miracle solution. If you don't care about where food comes from, how it's produced, or how efficient it is, duckweed won't suddenly change your habits. And if you're expecting it to replace your entire diet, you're misunderstanding its role. But if you care about food security, budget efficiency, self-sufficiency, or future-proof nutrition, duckweed makes a lot of sense. Especially in regions where land is limited, water is available, and protein access is inconsistent. That's why it keeps resurfacing in global research instead of influencer content. One thing I've learned from years in this space is that the most valuable tools rarely announce themselves loudly. They just keep working in the background while everyone argues about trends. Here's another truth that doesn't get said enough. Not every solution is meant to scale globally in the same way. Duckweed's strength is adaptability. It can support communities, supplement diets, stabilize food systems, and reduce dependency on fragile supply chains. It doesn't need to replace eggs everywhere to matter. It just needs to exist where it's useful. And that's why calling it hidden is both accurate and misleading. It wasn't buried by some shadowy force. It was sidelined by a system optimized for profit over efficiency. That's a quieter, more boring explanation, but it's the honest one. If you've made it this far, ask yourself this. How many other things exist right now that work exceptionally well, but don't get attention because they don't fit the mainstream narrative? That question applies far beyond food. Before we wrap up, quick engagement check. Would you actually try something like duckweed if it were available where you live? Or does the idea still feel too unfamiliar? Drop your honest take in the comments. Those conversations matter more than most people realize. If you want to explore sources, research papers, or products related to duckweed and Wolffia, I've linked everything in the description. No hype, just references. Here's the final insider takeaway I want to leave you with. Scarcity isn't always real. Sometimes it's engineered by habit, perception, and outdated systems. Duckweed doesn't solve everything, but it exposes how narrow our definition of normal food has become. Remember, it's not about chasing the next superfood. It's about understanding what actually works, why it works, and who it works for. If this changed the way you think about protein or food systems at all, hit like, subscribe, and check out the next video. Because once you start questioning assumptions, there's no going back. And that's where the real advantage begins.